For 3,000 years, the story has been simple. A hero, a monster, a maze. The hero wins. The monster dies. Nobody ever asks who built the cage. Nobody ever asks why the greatest engineer of the ancient world was hired to build an underground prison with exactly one cell. For life, nobody ever asks why that cell was fed 14 children. Every 9 years. In the dark. And almost nobody remembers that a Greek historian, writing 2,400 years ago, already said there was never a monster at all. The monster had a name. It was Asterion, the starry one. His mother was a queen. His grandfather was the king of the gods. And somewhere in the stone corridors beneath the palace of Knossos, he lived his entire life in absolute darkness, because his existence was the kind of secret a royal family kills to keep buried. This is not the story of Theseus. This is the story of a household that built a cage for a child, and then spent a generation feeding it other people's children to keep it quiet. And according to a historian named Philochorus, quoted by Plutarch, who was unwilling to forget him, this may be closer to what actually happened than the story you were told. To understand who was really inside the labyrinth, you have to start where every royal crime starts. Not with the victim, with the family. Minos was the king of Crete, the son of Zeus and Europa, the ruler of the most powerful naval kingdom in the Aegean. And according to Apollodorus, at one point in his reign, Minos prayed to the god of the sea Poseidon to send him a sign of divine favor. Perfect white bull, rising from the waves. In return, Minos promised to sacrifice the bull on Poseidon's altar. The bull came. It was flawless, white as salt, bigger than any animal in the Cretan herds. And Minos kept it. He sacrificed a lesser bull instead. He thought the god would not notice. He thought wrong. Poseidon did notice. And Poseidon did not take his revenge on Minos directly. He took it on the queen. Her name was Pasiphae. She was the daughter of the sun god Helios, the sister of the witch Circe. She had divine blood running in her veins on both sides of her family. She was not some mortal woman. She was royalty and she was sacred. Poseidon placed a curse on her. An uncontrollable, unnatural desire for the white bull her husband had refused to sacrifice. A punishment aimed at Minos through the body of his wife. This is the part of the myth I want you to hold on to. Pasiphae did not choose this. It was a curse. It was inflicted on her by a god she had never offended. In the telling preserved by Ovid in the Metamorphoses, her torment is not sin. It is something closer to possession. Ovid gives her a voice, and in his version she is the most tragic figure in the story. A queen trapped in the shape of her own obsession. Living in exile at the Cretan court at that time was an Athenian craftsman, the greatest engineer the ancient world had ever produced. His name was Daedalus, and Daedalus built her a wooden cow, hollow, covered in a real hide, so that the curse could complete itself. Because a curse from a god does not end until it gets what it was sent to do. And so a child was born. A child with the body of a boy and the head of a bull. A child whose existence was the shape of someone else's sin. He did not ask to be conceived. He did not ask to be born. He did nothing to earn the label the world would stamp on him for the next 3,000 years. The label was this: Minotauros, the bull of Minos. And I want you to hear that word clearly. Minotauros is not a name. It is a brand of ownership.
Minotaur.
The bull that belongs to Minos. The same way you might say the king's horse or the king's hound. It is the grammar you use for property, not for a person. But in the shadows of the myth, someone had already given him a real name. Someone loved him long enough at the beginning to name him. The historian Apollodorus records it in his Bibliotheca, Book 3. He writes that Pasiphae gave birth to a child who was called Asterion, who was later called the Minotaur. Asterion. Asterios, the starry one. Think about what it means to give a newborn that name. You look at a child who has just come into the world, and you decide to name him after the sky, after the constellations, after the light that only exists far away from the place you are about to put him. Someone named him Asterion. And that same household, the same royal house that named him, would, within his first year of life, decide that his existence was a problem that needed to be locked underground. The child was named. The child was royal. The child was, in every technical sense, a prince of the kingdom of Crete. And the child was born into a world where his existence could not be allowed to exist. Here is the strange part. In the ancient world, royal families dealt with shameful children all the time. Illegitimate sons. Deformed infants. Heirs of the wrong mother. The standard solution was blunt and it was quick. A body in a river. A basket in the reeds. A death that never got recorded. Minos did not do that. Minos did not kill the child. Why? The ancient sources do not tell us. Polydorus does not explain it. Diodorus does not explain it. Ovid does not explain it. The silence in the sources is itself an artifact. Something stopped Minos from doing the expected thing. Whether it was fear of Pasiphae or a priestly warning or some older Cretan law about royal blood or something entirely lost to us, we do not know. What we know is what happened next. Minos called Daedalus back, the same Athenian engineer who had built the wooden cow. And he gave him a new commission. Not a palace, not a temple, not a tomb. Prison. Prison for one prisoner. A prison with no possibility of escape. A prison so complex that nothing walking inside it could ever find the way back out again. Ovid, in the Metamorphoses, describes the building this way. He says Daedalus was a man famous for his skill in the builder's art, that he confused the usual marks of direction, that he led the eye of the beholder astray by devious paths winding in different directions. That is not how you describe a palace. That is how you describe a trap. The building had a name. The name was Labyrinthos, and here is the first strange thing about that word. It is not Greek. The ending, nthos, belongs to an older layer of language that was spoken in the Aegean before Greek-speaking peoples ever arrived there. The same ending you hear in Corinth, in Olynthos, in Hyacinth. Labyrinthos was a word that Greece inherited from the culture that came before it, from the Minoans themselves, which means by the time the story of Theseus reached Homer, the word labyrinth had already been old for 1,000 years. Some scholars have proposed that it comes from Labres, the double-headed axe, which was the central sacred symbol of Minoan religion. If that theory is right, then Labyrinthos means something like the house of the double axe, which would make it not a maze at all, but the royal sanctuary itself. The most sacred building in the kingdom. I want to be careful here. That etymology is disputed. The link is suggestive, not proven. But even if we set the word aside, the archaeology is real. The Palace of Knossos, excavated by Sir Arthur Evans starting in the year 1900, was not one building. It was more than 1,300 rooms, connected on multiple levels, stacked with storage halls, religious rooms, workshops, and long corridors that doubled back on themselves. It had no defensive walls. It did not need them. Crete was the dominant sea power of the Bronze Age Aegean, and no one sailed against her. But it also had, beneath its ground floor, cellars, magazines, storage rooms lined with massive clay jars, pithoi, each of them taller than a man. Places where, if you wanted to keep something out of the sunlight, you could do so for a very long time. Greek visitors walking through the ruins of Knossos centuries later, after the Minoans had collapsed and the stories had started to drift loose from there, Origins could reasonably have looked at the place and called it a labyrinth. Whatever the exact structure Daedalus built, the Palace of Knossos is the thing that survived into memory as the labyrinth. And inside there was a child. He went in as a newborn, or maybe as a toddler. The sources do not say. What the sources agree on is that he was put inside, and he did not come out. Imagine what that means as a sensory reality. You are a child whose eyes have just begun to open to the world. And the world that you are handed is stone. Cold stone walls, stone floors, stone above you, one torch maybe not even that. The sound of your own breathing comes back to you as an echo off surfaces you cannot see. The smell of damp rock, the smell of yourself. You have no mother in that place. You have no sister. You have no sky. You have never seen a tree. You have never felt rain. You do not know what the sun is, because you have never been in a room where light comes from above. A day passes. A month passes. A year passes. 10 years pass. 20 years pass. This was not a maze. This was not a puzzle. This was not a game for heroes. This was solitary confinement for life, and the life sentence had been handed down before the prisoner was old enough to speak. But a prison with one prisoner is still a prison. And even a prison needs a story to explain itself. Sooner or later, someone was going to ask questions. Someone was going to wonder what the king was hiding underground. And the royal household of Crete needed an answer ready, for the day that question came. The answer came from Athens. A few years into Asterion's imprisonment, Minos's eldest son, a young man named Androgeos, sailed to the Greek mainland to compete in the Panathenaic Games. These were the most prestigious athletic games in the ancient world, held every 4 years in honor of the goddess Athena. Young men from across the Mediterranean came to compete. Androgeos won everything, every event, every wrestling match, every race, every throw. He was, by every account that survives, the finest athlete of his generation. The son of a sea king, raised on the strongest island in the Aegean. And he humiliated Athens on her own sacred festival ground. And then he died. There are 2 versions of how. Apollodorus records them both. In one version, the king of Athens, a man named Aegeus, was so humiliated or so threatened by Androgeos' victories that he sent the young prince against the bull of Marathon, a wild, famously deadly animal, hoping he would not survive the encounter. He did not survive. In the other version, Androgeos was ambushed on the road to Thebes by jealous competitors who could not stand to lose to a Cretan. Either way, the blood was on Athens. Minos heard the news. And Minos did what Minos always did when something was taken from him. He sent the fleet. The Cretan navy crossed the Aegean and laid siege to the cities of Attica. Athens did not fall immediately. Athens was a major power, but the siege dragged on. And then the plague came. We do not know which plague. The ancient sources do not name a specific illness. What they tell us is that the citizens began to die in their homes, and the elders of Athens sent runners to Delphi, to the oracle of Apollo, and asked the oracle what to do. The oracle answered plainly, "Give Minos whatever he demands." So the elders of Athens asked Minos what he wanted. And Minos named his price. 7 young men, 7 young women, from the best families of Athens, delivered to Crete every 9 years, handed over alive, 14 children, every 9 years. That was the price of Androgeos. And I want you to stop and sit with those 2 numbers for a moment, because neither one of them is arbitrary. 14 is a ritual number. 7 and 7. Male and female. Balance. The highest quality offering a city could make. You do not pick 14 if you want 14 bodies. You pick 14 if you want ceremony. And 9 years. Why 9 years? Homer in the Odyssey says that Minos ruled Crete for 9 years. Cycles, as the confidant of great Zeus. Every 9th year, according to the oldest Greek tradition, Minos withdrew to a sacred cave on Mount Ida and spoke with the king of the gods, and his authority to rule was renewed. The 9-year cycle was the sacred heartbeat of Cretan kingship. The tribute was synchronized to it, which means the 14 children were not just victims of a revenge demand. They were part of a sacred ritual calendar, a religious offering tied to the renewal of the king's divine right to rule. Every 9 years, the drumbeat of royal power demanded 14 names. And every 9 years, a ship with black sails left the harbor of Athens for the harbor of Knossos. The story the royal family of Crete told about those children was simple. The children were being fed to the monster in the labyrinth. The monster was Pasiphae's curse, the shame of the kingdom, the beast that could not be killed but could not be released either. And so, to keep him from breaking free, he had to be fed. That was the story. That was the official version. The one the poets sang. The one the tribute children heard as they were put on the ship. But pause here. Pause with me. Because the official version is exactly the kind of story that royal houses have always told when they need to explain why people go into a building and do not come out. And in this case, we know something the tribute children did not know. We know that the historian writing for centuries later was not convinced. We know that at least one Greek scholar, sitting in a library in Athens in the 4th century before Christ, read the official version and decided it did not hold together. His name was Philochorus, and he wrote a version of this story that almost did not survive. Philochorus lived in Athens during the 4th and 3rd centuries before Christ. He was not a poet. He did not sing about heroes. He was an athedographer, a writer who specialized in the local history of Attica, which meant he spent his life collecting documents, cross-checking older records, and trying to reconstruct what had actually happened in the Athenian past. Almost all of his writing has been lost. Libraries burned. Scrolls crumbled. Centuries passed. The names of the books he wrote survive, but most of the words inside them are gone. And yet we still hear his voice on this one particular story. We hear it because, 400 years after Philochorus lived, a Greek philosopher and biographer named Plutarch sat down to write a Life of Theseus. And when Plutarch came to the part about the Labyrinth and the tribute from Athens, he did not just tell the version the poets had handed down. He paused and he wrote something like, "But Philochorus says," and then he recorded Philochorus's version. Here is what Philochorus said, as Plutarch preserved it. He said that the labyrinth was not a maze. It was a prison that people were thrown into and could not find their way back out of. Which is, incidentally, exactly what we already know the labyrinth functionally was. Philochorus is not adding a twist. He is stripping away the myth and describing the architecture. Then he said this: "The tribute children from Athens were not fed to a monster. Minos held funeral games in honor of his dead son Androgeos. The Athenian children were the prize. Whoever won the games received the children as slaves. And the first man to win those games in every event was a man named Taurus." Taurus. In Greek, the word means bull. Philochorus describes this Taurus as a harsh and savage man, a commander of the royal bodyguard, a general whose brutality was so notorious that the city of Knossos was afraid of him. He was the man who killed the Athenian champions in the arena. He was the man whose name meant bull, and who represented the king who owned him. In Philochorus's version, the Minotaur was not a beast. The Minotaur was that man. The Minotaur minus plus Tauros was literally Minos's bull. Minos's general. The cruel commander everyone knew by his nickname. And the monster story was what the Cretans told outsiders to explain why the Athenian children never came home. Plutarch does not endorse this version. He records it as a tradition. He is a careful historian, and he knows there is another tradition, the poetic one, with the bull-headed child in the maze. He lays them side by side. He is saying, in effect, here is what Homer and Hesiod and the poets say, and here is what Philochorus, who was sifting the archives, said instead. You decide. And Philochorus was not the only one. In the same century that Philochorus was working, a philosopher named Philochorus wrote a book called On Unbelievable Things. In it, he took almost every Greek monster, centaurs, gorgons, chimeras, and tried to explain them as misremembered facts. A centaur was a horseman seen from a distance. A gorgon was a fearsome priestess. And the Minotaur, Philochorus said, was a man. A man. Nothing more. This means the rationalizing reading, the reading that says there was never a monster, only a prison and a cruel man and a story to cover both, is not a modern invention. It is not a 21st century hot take. It is at least as old as the 4th century before Christ. The ancient Greeks themselves looked at this story and decided that some of its pieces did not fit together. Think about that for a moment. 2,500 years ago, there were Greek scholars, Greek, speaking the language of Homer, living inside the same religion that produced the myth, who looked at the labyrinth and said, that is a prison. Who looked at the Minotaur and said, that is a man. Who looked at the tribute and said, someone was using a monster story to explain something a royal family wanted buried. And yet, when you grew up hearing about the Minotaur, did anyone tell you that? Did anyone mention Philochorus? Did anyone say, by the way, the Greeks themselves had a version where there was no monster at all, and it was preserved in one of the most famous works of ancient biography, and you can read it right now in chapter 15 through 19 of Plutarch's Life of Theseus? Probably not. Probably you heard about a bull-headed beast in a maze and a hero with a ball of string. That is the version that was allowed to survive in the popular memory. The other version, the historian's version, lived on in the libraries, in the scholarly notes, in the margins of the books almost no one reads anymore. So here is the question this video is really asking. Between the poet's version and the historian's version, which one would you like to know? Because from this point forward, whichever one you choose, the ending is almost the same. A young man walks into the dark, and only one of them walks out. The year the third tribute sailed from Athens, a young prince stepped forward and volunteered to go with it. His name was Theseus. He was the son of King Aegeus, the same king whose decisions had gotten Androgeos killed in the first place. Plutarch tells us that Theseus insisted on going, that his father tried to stop him and could not, that Theseus said, "If this is my father's debt, let me be the one who pays it." Before the ship left the harbor, Aegeus made his son a promise, and asked for one in return. The ship was sailing under black sails, mourning colors, appropriate for a voyage of tribute. But Aegeus told Theseus that if he came home alive, he should change the sails to white. White sails would be visible from the cliffs of Cape Saunion, miles out to sea. Aegeus would be watching. White meant his son had survived. Black meant he had not. Theseus promised. The ship reached Crete. The tribute children were unloaded onto the docks of Knossos. And on that dock, waiting with her father's court, was a young woman who had never been allowed near the dark place beneath the palace. Her name was Ariadne. She was the daughter of King Minos and Queen Pasiphae, which means, and I want you to hold on to this, she was the half-sister of Asterion. She had never met him. She had probably never seen him. For her whole life, the existence of her brother had been a royal secret, a thing not spoken of in the rooms she moved through. She had been raised above the labyrinth the way a child can be raised above a basement they are told never to enter. And then she saw Theseus step off the ship. The ancient sources say she fell in love with him. Immediately, within hours, she went to him in secret and she gave him two things. She gave him a sword, so that he would not walk into the dark unarmed. And she gave him a ball of thread, which he was to tie at the entrance of the labyrinth and unspool as he walked, so that when the killing was done, he could follow the thread back out. Hold on that image for a moment. The gift of the thread was not an act of heroism. It was an act of family betrayal. Ariadne knew, at some level she may not have been able to name, that her father was keeping a secret underground, that the secret had a face, that the secret was hers, and she handed a stranger a sword and a way to find it. Theseus went in. He unspooled the thread as he walked, deeper and deeper, through corridors that bent back on themselves and through rooms that opened into nothing. He went to the center, and in the center he found Asterion. And here is where the ancient sources go quiet. There is no heroic fight scene. There is no duel. Homer does not describe it. Hesiod does not describe it. Ovid barely describes it. The only ancient author who tells us how the killing happened is Apollodorus, in his Bibliotheca, and the sentence he writes is astonishingly short. He says that Theseus found the Minotaur in the innermost part of the labyrinth, and killed him with his fists. With his fists. There is no sword in that sentence. There is no weapon. The sword Ariadne gave him does not appear in the killing. The prisoner, a man who had never been taught to fight, who had lived his entire life alone in the dark, who had probably never held another person's hand, let alone a weapon, was killed with bare hands. It is the single most brutal detail in the entire story, and almost no retelling ever mentions it, because it does not fit the picture of a heroic combat. It fits the picture of an execution. Theseus followed the thread back out. He took Ariadne with him. They boarded the ship and sailed away from Crete, toward Athens, and toward the rest of Theseus's life. They did not make it home together. They stopped at the island of Naxos to rest. And while Ariadne was sleeping, Theseus quietly ordered his men back to the ship, and they left her there. The woman who had betrayed her own family to save him was abandoned on the shore of an empty island, and she woke up alone. Catullus, writing 6 centuries later, gives us the longest lament we have from her side. A queen's daughter crying on a beach to a sea that did not answer. Theseus never changed the black sails to white. Some sources say he forgot. Others say the god Dionysus, who had found Ariadne on Naxos and taken her as his bride, caused Theseus to forget as a punishment for abandoning her. The sails stayed black. On the cliffs of Cape Saunion, King Aegeus saw the black sails on the horizon. He saw the color of death returning from Crete. He threw himself off the cliff into the sea below. That sea is still named for him. It is called the Aegean. And back in Crete, the story was not finished. Minos learned, after the ship had gone, that Daedalus had given Ariadne the thread. That his own engineer had helped dismantle his kingdom's most guarded secret. And Minos locked Daedalus and his son Icarus inside the labyrinth. Inside the building Daedalus himself had designed to be inescapable. Daedalus built wings of feathers and wax. He and Icarus flew out, and the boy, Icarus, flew too close to the sun. The wax melted. He fell into the sea. That sea is also still named. It is called the Icarian Sea. Stop for a moment and count the dead. Asterion, killed in the dark by a stranger's fists. Pasiphae, who simply vanishes from the story after the curse. We are never told what happened to her. Androgeos, already dead in Athens, the original debt. Aegeus, dashed against the rocks of Cape Saunion. Icarus, drowned in the Icarian Sea. Ariadne, abandoned on Naxos. Rescued, in one version, by a god, but only after she had first been betrayed by the man she saved. Daedalus, who escaped the labyrinth alone, childless, with a son he could not bury. Every single person who touched this story lost someone. Every single person who made a choice about the secret in the dark paid for it. The labyrinth took something from everyone who ever walked its corridors. Whatever was really inside it, a monster or a prisoner or a general named Bull, the building itself was a kind of engine. You put someone into it and you did not get them back. Even Daedalus, the man who had built the walls, ended up inside them. He was the only one who walked out alive. And the price of his walking out was his own son. So let me leave you with this. The boy had a name. His name was Asterion, the starry one. Somebody, the mother, a nurse, a priest, we will never know, stood over a newborn in the palace of Knossos and decided to call him after the sky. Somebody cared about him long enough to give him that. And then the same household built a door in the ground and put him behind it. Whether the poets were right and there was a bull-headed creature in the dark, or whether the historians were right and there was only a man, a prison, and a story to cover both, the question at the center of the myth is the same. A royal family decided that a child's existence was more dangerous to them than a child's death. And when that decision cost 14 children every 9 years, the question stops being about monsters and starts being about what families will bury. Philochorus knew it. Plutarch preserved it. And for 2,000 years, almost nobody bothered to remember it. We are still building labyrinths. Not out of stone anymore. Out of institutions. Out of paperwork. Out of long, quiet silences. We still put people inside them because their existence is inconvenient to the stories we want to tell about ourselves. We still feed them on schedule. We still call them by the labels that make them easier to ignore. The name was Asterion. Not Minotaur. Asterion. Try saying it out loud once, just to see how it feels in your mouth, after 3,000 years of everyone else calling him something that was not his name. So here is my question for you. Whose version of the story did you grow up with, the poets or the historians? And do you think if we could ask the Greeks who actually built the labyrinth, they would have wanted us to remember both? If you want to hear more stories like this, the ones they never told you, subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments.